Good evening. Welcome to the Maison Francaise. We are very happy to welcome you here tonight to this event sponsored by the Maison Francaise and the film program in the School of the Arts. And really it's a great honor and privilege to have the legendary filmmaker Marcel Ophuls with us tonight for a discussion about his works. And he will be he is joined by Annette Insdorf and John Friedman. Annette will be introducing Mr. Ophuls in just a moment, but I just wanted to first thank our sponsor of this evening's event, the Knapp Family Foundation, and President Charlie Knapp is here with us this evening, and his daughter Emily Knapp is also a member of their board, so thank you very much to the Knapp Family Foundation. And I also wanted to mention that tonight is the first in a series of events we'll be having over the next couple of days on World War II and Vichy. Tomorrow evening we're having a screening of La Combustion with a presentation and Q&A by Richard Olson and Lynn Higgins. And then on Friday we have a full-day conference on the work of Patrick Modiano that starts at 9:30 through 5 o'clock. You can see the full agenda for that conference on our website. And Monday evening, October 5th, we will have Professor Robert Paxton will be here with us talking about the re-edition of his book Vichy et les Juifs, and he will be joined by André Rousseau and Phil Nord. So I hope that you'll be able to come back to join us for some of these other upcoming events over the next couple of days. Annette made me promise to keep my introduction very, very brief of her, and then she will in turn introduce Marcel Ophuls. Annette is a very dear colleague in the School of the Arts and a professor of film studies. Her books include Indelible Shadows, Film in the Holocaust, and François Truffaut. She's a specialist, among other things, of films on World War II and the Holocaust. And she also, in addition to being a wonderful academic and a revered teacher, has very much a voice in the public sphere as well. She's published articles in a number of places, including the New York Times, Huffington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, the Los Angeles Times, and elsewhere. She's also a very skilled panel moderator, as you will see this evening, and has moderated panel discussions at the 92nd Street Y, Telluride Film Festival, and elsewhere, and has been a co-host of several film programs on TV programs about film. So we're really very lucky to have her here at Columbia, and very happy to have her joining this conversation this evening. And John Friedman is one of the directors of Hotel Terminus, and is producer, of Hotel Terminus, and is a filmmaker in his own right, and I think we'll hear more about his career as well in the conversation this evening. So please join me in welcoming Marcel Ophuls and Annette and John. Thank you.
I definitely feel like I'm the lucky one here, because to my left is a gentleman who I consider to be one of the greatest living filmmakers in the world. I cannot imagine film history without his classics, for example, of nonfiction, notably The Sorrow and the Pity from 1969, and then, of course, The Memory of Justice, 1976, recently presented in a restored version at the New York Film Festival, and Hotel Terminus, The Life and Times of Klaus Barbie from 1988. I'm curious how many here saw Hotel Terminus again, either today or in the past few days? A few of you. All right, I will set it up a little bit then in my introduction. And I should mention that even though this gentleman is known primarily for those nonfiction films, and I would have to add his wonderful film, A Sense of Loss, about the Irish Troubles, and also the troubles we've seen about Sarajevo and the journalists there. But he started out in fiction, right? Back in 1962, when François Truffaut had him contribute to Love at 20. And then in 1963, a wonderful French comedy called Peau de Banane, Banana Peel, starring Jean Moreau and Jean-Pierre Belmondo. So don't think that this man has made only serious nonfiction classics. To his left, John Friedman, I just want you to know, was the lead executive producer on Hotel Terminus. He is the co-director and co-producer of Stealing the Fire, a documentary about a German nuclear spy in the 1980s and the role of a German corporation during and after the war. I saw it, and I do remember Karl-Heinz Schaub, the German technician, who was convicted of selling key atomic technology to Saddam Hussein's government. It was selected by the International Documentary Association as a finalist for the Best Documentary in 2002. He's the author of 2 books. He has written for the New York Times, commentary, and is a longtime contributor to The Nation. And he's a professor of media and communications at SUNY Old Westbury. Hotel Terminus did win the Academy Award for the Best Documentary of 1988. And I think it shows how Marcel Ophuls' quest for justice is inseparable from his vigorously dialectical style. And among other things, it is a riveting detective story.
Sorry?
It is a riveting detective story because you illuminate with a kind of indignation and irony an entire era. It's not just about Klaus Barbie, who hardly ever appears in the film, just as he hardly...
He couldn't because he was in jail.
Exactly. But instead, it explores the Nazi officers' nefarious activities in wartime France. Also, his service to American counterintelligence after World War II, and his welcome in Bolivia, where, as Klaus Altman, he was security advisor to South American dictators. I'm sure many of you know that he was called the Butcher of Lyon. He was extradited to France in 1983 and finally condemned to life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. Now, because you did not have that much access to Klaus Barbie himself, this film becomes a kind of puzzle that even reminded me a little bit of Citizen Kane, and perhaps of Andrzej Wajda's brilliant Polish drama, Man of Marble, where we participate in the investigation, the attempt to know a public figure, and realize we never really can penetrate a public figure. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes, that was one of the difficulties, you see. Let me start, if I may, how this film came to be. There was this young man who called me one day in Paris and asked me, would you be interested? Yes. Incidentally, I'm becoming very hard of hearing. So, and I really don't, it's difficult, it's a bit difficult. So, when it comes around to questions, it would be very nice if you had a microphone so that I can actually hear the question. So most of the time they have to be repeated to me otherwise. Anyway, I got a call one day in Paris from a young man who thought I might be interested in doing a film about Django Reinhardt, and he had, I think, 20 pages of this. And at the time, that was already a little wrong. I wasn't all that interested in Django Reinhardt. Also, I didn't think that those 20 pages were terrific. It was all that. And I said, no, I don't think so. So on the phone, this young man asked me, well, what are you doing right now? I said, well, I've been commissioned by a magazine called The Nation to cover the Barbie trial. And this young man, who's no longer all that young, is sitting to my left right now. And he said, oh, really? Klaus Barbie, that's so interesting. Wouldn't that make a great documentary film? And I remember my first reaction was to say, No, I don't think it would, because aside from his victims, who may or may not be eager to talk, the people involved in the Klaus Barbie story, just as soon as they hear the name Klaus Barbie and what the film is supposed to be about, they'll run away. They'll run away, they won't be available. And that's how the project got started, because indeed, as usual, I was trying to look out for the groceries and making a living. And so we started working, and the idea, the original idea which I had, which is indeed, to talk about Citizen Kane. My God, Citizen Kane. But anyway, the idea originally was to wait for the trial, see the witnesses at the trial, and then follow them up. And that didn't work out because the trial didn't take place, and it still didn't take place, and it still didn't take place. And so we ran into a great deal of trouble very soon, because the funding, of course, depended on all of this. And then we came together to the decision, well, let's try at least to get enough money together to do Bolivia, to do 10 days in Bolivia together. And how he got the money, I don't know, he'd have to tell you that. But so we went to Bolivia and did those 10 days in Peru and Bolivia, on a shoestring really. And then we were in the thing, and one of the troubles, I think, is that François Mitterrand had when he came into office, because of Robert Badinter, whose parents had been deported by Barbie, he did make that decision to, what would you call it, extradite him or kidnap him or whatever you want to call it. And then once he had him, he didn't really want to go on with the thing, because of course it involved a lot of people in France were afraid that at a trial things would come out that they really didn't want to come out. So the whole, it took how many years to do the film?
About 5 years.
Sure,
We went to Bolivia in '85,
yes.
but we had already been talking about it in '84, and then the film wasn't finished. Then the film wasn't finished really until the end of '88.
Yes.
So-
At one time, I
4
remember
years, really.
that Badinter
Almost 5.
called me into his office. He was a minister of justice. He called me into his office and said, well, Ophuls, you can tell your producers, meaning him, you can tell your producers that it's all set now. It's going to come next March. I'm saying March, often. And he was wrong. It still took another 6 months. And so it was a long film. It was for me, a very unhappy film, because I got him into trouble up to his neck, myself into trouble, and for a long time we really saw no way out of this infernal tunnel. So we just kept on filming in Germany, in other places in Germany, and by pattern weave, and we edited, and in the had to even have 2 teams so that we could be ready, what was it, the time for Cannes?
Yeah, exactly. Time for Cannes, yeah.
Time for Cannes. And so we made it in the end, but the tunnel was a very long one. And for me, possibly also for John, for other reasons, very unhappy one. This is a film of mine, because I filmed my memoirs. I attempted suicide and almost succeeded, very nearly succeeded, because it was such a hard thing to pull off. Anyway, that's a little bit the story of the film, I think.
Yeah, it's a combination of the subject matter, which was difficult, and
Traumatized.
yeah,
Subject
exactly.
matter itself was traumatized.
And then all the other elements that are involved in making a documentary like this, as Marcel said, the funding, the timing, the political background, not only in France, but in Latin America. So we had to put all these pieces together, and often it was frustrating, and we didn't know where we were going to come out at the end.
But that raises...
If I may just say, at one point, John and Hamilton Fish thought, well, if the trial doesn't take place, at least the film can take the place of the trial. And that's the point that I was in fundamental disagreement. It was essential for France, and essential, I think, for all of us, that this trial take place, and I don't think a film can ever, or should ever, replace films. But yes, those were some of the issues.
What you described might have been the case for any number of documentary filmmakers, because heaven knows, you shoot and you shoot and you shoot, you're not even certain what you're going to have at the end, and it's shaped in the editing room. And yes, you had, if I remember correctly, something like 40 hours of interviews, 120 hours of footage, at least that.
120 hours.
And then you had 2 teams, Albert Jurgensen, Catherine Sims editing. But what fascinates me, and what marks Hotel Terminus as a Marcel Ophuls film, is the tone, the lacerating wit that you interweave, for example, by juxtaposing Fred Astaire singing I pick myself, dust myself off and start all over again, with the image of Regan visiting the Bitburg Cemetery. That's what interests me in particular. How, at what point, do you come up with some of those rather personal grace notes, juxtapositions that mark your film as not simply an objective documentary, but as a very personal one?
Yes, and that raises this whole issue about documentaries, the issue of objectivity and subjectivity. Because I got started on all of this in television, with French television, it seemed when I started out, even before the song, that there was a film about Munich in 1938, I was given the task of handling contemporary history on television. And it seemed natural to use this technique of interviews, which I had learned in journalism working for French television, and weave them with archival material. That's how it really started. And this business about making very long films, well, making a film on contemporary history in two parts, where you hope that the audience will find the time to see 2 hours one evening and another 2 hours the next evening, doesn't seem like such a revolutionary song. It's still such a big deal. But that's where it started. And then, in due time, there came this whole question with, well, point of view. And direct cinema. And this idea that this was in some way in conflict with the idea of direct cinema and cinema verite. And when I'm just coming back to the States, I notice in conversations that nowadays they call fiction narrative filmmaking. And, excuse me, but these are misnomers, because shouldn't any kind of filming be based on some kind of narration, some form of storytelling? It seems to me absurd. And also this idea of point of view. So there is now schools of thought that think that point of view cinema, which is I often get asked, well, at what point did you think you should be in the frame? Why don't they ask Michael Moore? Who is, I suppose, he said so, is a sort of disciple of mine, okay? So point of view documentaries. Well, it seems to me that the only cameras that may not have a point of view, because point of view is a matter of choice. If you make the choice while filming, it's one thing. If you make the choice in the editing room, it's another thing. But at some point you have to make a choice. It's all about choice. So the only non-point of view, the only cameras that a priori wouldn't have a point of view are surveillance cameras. Except that if you think about it, you might eventually find people faced with finding whose point of view is that the culprit should not be found, in which case they would throw away the moment where you see and that would be their point of view. So this seems to me to be very great nonsense, this whole dispute about objectivity. I mean, I believe that this is true not only for journalists but also for historians. Any approach of reality has to do with the eye of the beholder and with the choices made. So if my films in due time become more and more subjective, it's because I never believed in objectivity in the first place.
And I think many of us who teach film and study film would agree with you 100%, going back to André Bazin. I mean, for me, Bazin remains the greatest of the theorists, and he was the one who pointed out that in French, the word for the lens is l'objectif, but that there is no such thing as objectivité in the lens, because the minute you decide where to place the camera, that is already a choice. Absolutely. So we have to ask, so why that choice? How does that choice work? but always acknowledging, and by the way, I think even surveillance cameras have a point of view, because the corporations, let's say, that install them, they want the omniscient, divine perspective that can see everything at every moment, thereby giving the illusion to the watcher that they can control what's in the image.
Just to add one thought too, is that today with the internet and computers, everybody can be on YouTube. With Skype, everybody can have his or her image sent around the world. So everybody wants to have his or her own point of view. I mean, this has become something that's ubiquitous.
And dangerous.
And dangerous, very dangerous. Yes.
Because journalism is a profession. It is based on, journalism is based on some kind of research, some way of getting, some qualified way of getting at information and transmitting it. And if you leave this to just everybody, in the end, it threatens the conveying of information instead of helping. There are qualifications to being a journalist. When anybody just putting it on the net, I think it's a form of democracy which may end up by killing.
I'm going to go back though to Hotel Terminus and to you before we return to the contemporary frame, which I am interested to hear more about from your perspective. But if we are acknowledging that there really is no objectivity, even in non-fiction filmmaking, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about how you see yourself, how you identify. You were born in Frankfurt, right? The son of the great director Marcel Ophuls. You end up fleeing first to France, then to the United States. You served in the US Army, right? So there's the American part of the identity. You have... Yeah, we're going to try to get him a social security number. That's an aside. In any case, he has one, but we can't find it. In any case, I'm curious, how do you now identify, how do you see yourself? You live in France. Do you feel that you are French? Do you feel Jewish? Do you feel American or binational? Do you feel like you're always in some sense of exile?
It depends on the day, the atmosphere, the geography around me. All of these things some of the time. I do have the two passports, American and French. And Jewish, yes, of course. Not all the time, no. I think that people who spend their life just feeling Jewish are missing out on a great part of their life.
Well, I ask this partly because Hotel Terminus, like The Sorrow and the Pity and The Memory of Justice, have become not only important parts of film history, but of a cultural discourse within France and beyond. And I jotted down one of the lines from The Sorrow and the Pity that has always stayed with me. You have former Prime Minister Pierre Mendès France acknowledging that anti-Semitism is always latent and easy to revive in France. And I've been thinking about how anti-Semitism seems to recur lately in France in 10-year cycles. You know, in 1980, you have the Rue Copernic attack. Then you have the desecration of graves in Carpentras in 1990. Then you've got the wave of synagogue attacks in the suburbs rising in 2000. And of course, by 2014, the attack in the kosher supermarket. It leads me to ask how you see the France in which you made Hotel Terminus, vis-a-vis, for example, the France that you live in now. Do you believe that, for example, anti-Semitism has gotten worse? Do you believe that it is
Yes, I do.
easier or harder to make a film?
Just saying because you said, do I believe that it's gotten worse? Yes, I do. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, that's quite right. Because what I'm curious is how you see your films in the context of an ongoing conversation about Jewish identity, about World War II in French cultural discourse. I mean, are you aware that your films are still being really utilized in that conversation?
Netanyahu has, over the past few years, repeatedly stated that France presents the gravest symptoms of the renaissance of anti-Semitism. I don't think I agree with anything else. Actually, matter of fact, I don't like him at all. He's right-wing. He is the kind of Zionist that I totally disapprove of. But in that respect, in this particular respect, he's probably pretty much on target. Now, why this is so and what relationship it has in the film, Annette, I don't think it really has any particular relationship to me and to my films, except that once in a while I do think, well, whatever I tried to do in that respect, I didn't quite succeed. I must have failed, because, but then I don't believe that films have all that much influence. And I think it's a good thing that they don't have all that much influence. It's all this business, when I talk to young students who is maybe getting off the point, perhaps on purpose. I don't deny that, maybe on purpose. This whole idea of young documentary, future documentarians who think, will it have impact? Will it have impact? And it is true that for historical reasons, and by creating a scandal in France, the song that he had some sort of impact. You can say that, I suppose. It's temporary. But then the question arises, well, shock films have impact. I think one of the greatest impacts in the history of movies is that when Clark Gable in It Happened One Night opened his shirt and there was no undershirt, that had impact because it drove, I think, a lot of people manufactured undershirts into bankruptcy. That really is impact. And I've been there only in the half as a joke. Perhaps we shouldn't have much more impact than that, because films, basically, films, whether they are documentary or other, should be based on other things, but ideology or politics. They should be made, I think, primarily to make you laugh. should have an emotion. They should, I think, they're part of show business. Doesn't matter whether they're narrative fiction. Although I tend to prefer fiction films to documentaries in their own right. Perhaps it's a shame that my documentaries have taken are influenced by the fact that I would have much preferred to spend the rest of my life with actors instead of what are known as real people.
Just to add a note to that, Marcel, the famous quote that one of the Hollywood moguls made years ago, if you want to send a message, use Western Union.
Yes, Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes, yes.
Yeah, we've pinned it down for a while. I wasn't sure what's that, but it was Howard Hughes.
Yes.
Who in many ways was a totalitarian bastard. But that happens to be a rather apt and yes. He may have been a totalitarian right-wing bastard, but he was no fool. And he
But
was a pretty smart cookie.
I would still propose that at least at the time that The Sorrow and the Pity came out, and Bernard-Henri Lévy has talked about this as well, that until 1969, in France, people did not talk about le pétainisme. There was this image in France of post-World War II collective heroism. And then you make The Sorrow and the Pity, and all of a sudden, there is an awareness within and outside of France that there was a great deal of indifference and fatal complicity on the part of the French vis-à-vis the Nazi occupation.
Yes, but not all
So-
of them. And that, not all of them. I mean, what it comes down to really is that, and that would be the case, I think, in any crisis of that kind, is that, and I think that Robert Paxton, who's here right now, agrees with this. He was writing his book at the same time that we were making the film. We didn't know about each other at all. But if it hadn't happened, if we hadn't made the film, very soon, sooner or later, and more sooner than later, the time had simply come to explode that myth of a whole people resisting the invader, because it's unbelievable from a human point of view. It's totally unbelievable in itself. It was a sort of a unspoken coalition between the Gaullists, that is the right wing, and the communists, who kept up this myth for a long time. But when it comes down to real, it would have been, I think, it's just part of human nature in crisis. About 500,000 people decided actively to resist. About 500,000 people decided actively to collaborate. And of course, I don't mean by that just listening to the BBC, because that, I mean, as good as it may have been, something. But most people have, in real life, have priorities that may not, they may have families. I mean, think of it, making the decision to go into the resistance meant putting your own family in danger. That is quite a decision to make. Not everybody is capable of making such a decision. Not everybody has the format, culture, background to come to such a decision. And so, exploding the myth, the time had come. I think Sidney and I did a good job doing it because we made a good film. The essential thing about the song of pity in this respect is that it is a good film. Somebody else would have come and made perhaps a film not as good, but with the same idea, because it had become in France and in the French climate unthinkable. I mean, this also had to do with 1968, had to do with the climate. 1968 came along, put all the fathers and the grandfathers and the families on trial. And so it was in that climate that we worked. So no, it's, to have made the song pity is not in itself a heroic deed of some kind. It's just doing that, I think doing a job that at that time needed to be done.
Okay, I'll allow you your modesty, but I choose to see it in a slightly different way.
Well, please tell us.
No, I think it's one of the most important films of the 20th century. And I think that there have been many other documentaries, and there were quite a few fiction films, especially in France, in the early 70s, that tried to confront the legacy of World War II in France under the Nazi occupation. It was the time, 68, you had right away Claude Berry's Le Vieil Homme et l'Enfant, the two of us, and then you had, well, La Comte du Sien, which is being shown here, I think, tomorrow, and you had Les Violons du Bal, and you had Black Thursday, Les Guichets du Louvre. I mean, there was a whole slew of films in the 1970s, each one offering a small part of a very large picture because each told a different story. And then there were
But that only
documentaries.
confirms what I just said.
But they didn't do
Time
it
had come
as
to
well.
deal with this subject matter. So we did in our own way. It only confirms really what it is. And as far as La Comte du Sien is concerned, and it's created, and that's another statement, cold period between Louis Malle and myself, because at some point when I was in the States, I read that he had said, if that hadn't been for the Song of the Pity, I couldn't have made La Comte du Sien. And since I disliked La Comte du Sien, and since I disliked the message, or the fundamental idea of La Comte du Sien, I did say to some journalists, and he found out about this, that I said, well, if that's the result, then it might be a better thing if I hadn't made something. I did go on record with that, because once these things become an issue, you can't expect people who make films to agree with each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just add something here that I think is relevant. That clearly Marcel has some very definite points of view. At the same time, his approach to filmmaking is very organic. In other words, very often he will let the film go in undefined directions, unplanned directions. For
That's
instance,
because I don't script beforehand.
Exactly.
Which lands me into an awful trouble, because it's quite understandable that people who commission you to make a film do want to know in advance how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to be. All these questions are quite legitimate. When I go into one of these things, I can't furnish the answer. And therefore, my life in that respect has not been an easy one, because to me, I'll take an example if I may. In The Memory of Justice, it was, since it's a film about the Nuremberg trials, it was quite obvious that Albert Speer would be a major figure. But how could I have predicted that he would be so cooperative, that he would show us his home movies? I mean, these things, my basic idea in this is that, again, it has to do with documentaries and the ideas about documentaries. Should it be point of view or not point of view? I do have this idea that if you are going to do non-fiction, you should let reality come to you and not go out with a predetermined thing. This is what we... As a matter of fact, this is also important with people that you have in front of the camera. It's different when you do television interviews live, which are formatted in advance, where people expect to have a list of questions. But here, what you're trying to do is create conversations, get away from the idea of interviewing. And so, very early on, I think in the beginning, I had lists of questions in the camera car, and then I found out that the best, whatever, if you've done your research properly, or at least as properly as you can approach the person in front of the camera by just about any question, or first question. But then you have to listen to their answer. And then instead of thinking, I still must ask this, I still must ask that, which you can also do and sometimes should do, but you should react to their answer. And then slowly it does become a conversation, I think. And so getting back to this business of scripting in advance, it reminds me of another, I put this, I think, in a preface of an early version of the print of, at one time, somebody text was printed. And I had found something that George Bernard Shaw had said in 28, just about the time when sound film came in. And he said, before a very prestigious audience, he said, if you take a camera and just film people walking across the street, you see people moving fast, other people moving slowly, one person going this direction, other people going in the other direction. And that's pretty all you see. Realizing from memory, but that's about what I say. Again, it takes us to this what should documentaries be about. And it said, but we don't know when these people move fast and these other people move slowly. And our job is to try to find out the reasons for this. And that's what a playwright's or dramatist's job is about. To make sense of what just doing this, you give sense. Storytelling, it's one story. Okay.
Marcel has a great sense of the psychology of the person who is in front of him, whom he's interviewing. And he's able to not only go with the person sometimes, but seemingly agree with the person to make the person feel more at home and relaxed. I would say, though, in many ways...
You mean, in other words, hypocrisy.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
No,
but it's true.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Obviously, there are some strategic problems involved.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I would say his organic theory of filmmaking, in the case of Hotel Terminus, for example, led us to a gardener in Bolivia who had worked for Barbie. And it was just one of these unexpected occurrences. And Marcel interviewed him and finally at the end said, well, this is what Barbie has done. What do you think should happen to him in a trial? And the man raised his arms, looked skyward, and he said, that is for God to decide. Which is one of these wonderful moments in filmmaking that you can never predict.
I don't entirely disagree with this man.
Sure.
But before that, he said he thought he was an idiot.
Yes. Yeah.
He said all the Barbie and Barbie's friends were noble men.
Right. Yes.
Noble men. He always referred to them as noble men. And yeah, we just happened to be there, and this fellow happened to be there. And he was Barbie's gardener while Barbie was living in Peru. Yes, that's an example of letting reality come to you. Instead, because how can you know these things in advance? If you script, how are you going to script that gardener whose existence you don't even know? How are you going to know that you're going to meet that gardener at that particular moment? So yes, it's an example of that sort.
We are going to take some questions from the audience. I have like 20 more, but I will put them on to the side for the moment.
Please.
Yes. No, we're going to take
No. Have I intimidated you about this business of asking questions?
Not at all, not at all.
Plans?
I just have a feeling that there are people here who wish
Yes,
to
of
ask you as
course.
well.
Yes.
I can jump in at any moment. You know me, I'm not shy. But we have one hand here.
Yes.
And you can use the microphone so that it's loud enough.
Maestro Lumley, I will not begin by asking if you are wearing an undershirt.
If I am,
Wearing an undershirt. but on the subject of being Jewish, do you know Ram Dass?
Ram Dass was a Jewish Buddhist and was
Part of the Harvard triad in the 60s, and he was a professor of philosophy at Harvard. He went to India to work.
yes.
And when he was asked if he was Jewish, he liked to reply, only on my parents' side.
That's very funny, very nice.
But I want to say, when I was young, I saw The Sorrow and the Pity, and it was a huge influence in my life. You showed me that documentary can be truly great and poetic, and you taught me an important lesson, that documentary doesn't always have to talk. There are great passages of silence in your film, and they have what I call, they scream with silence, and they can be as important as any narrative. That was an enormous lesson for me.
Really?
We look at
Right.
the early documentaries didn't talk so much, but they do now. They don't know how to be quiet.
Yes.
And finally, when I was a student of Professor Insdorf's and also Andrew Saris,
Yes.
I brought one sentence that he said about your father, which I'd like to read.
Yes.
If all the dollies and cranes in the world snap to attention when his name is mentioned, it is because he gave camera movement its finest hours in the history of cinema.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Susan Silverman. We exchanged some letters when I wrote about Hotel Terminus. But I was wondering, were you surprised by the negative reactions when Sorrow and the Pity came out? In other words, the way that people in France seem to think that you had not only exploded the mythe résistentialiste, but that you had then, quote unquote, blackened the reputation of France. You had made everyone into a collaborator, and you had done disservice to France. Blah 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 blah. A lot of people said this, and I've never understood this position because it's clear from your film that there were many people who were in the resistance, and there were some people, and there were some who were Pétainistes and collaborators, and many who were just trying to get by, like the pharmacist, who gives the film its title, who I always thought was kind of awful when I first saw the film. And then when I'm re-seeing it, I think he's not so bad. It was just like the ordinary, Frenchman with his family and so forth, as you said. But what I was wondering is, were you surprised by that somewhat violent reaction on the part of some people, including Safa, if I remember correctly? He wasn't violent, but he was, he thought that you had somehow done something that was that upset him, and Simone Weil and others. So anyway, that's my question.
She hasn't stopped. I mean, the animosity and the hostility toward the film is still there. It's never, and Simone Weil, in a very brief memoirs, incidentally very interesting memoirs. She is an Auschwitz survivor. She's also a remarkable woman in all sorts of respects. But even so much later, she takes that little book, 3.5 pages, I think, out of this little book, to attack the Sortopity again. One would think that whatever hostility she has had, she has had plenty of time to get over it. The burden she has. And she's not the only one. Your question, I think, was about, was I surprised? I was surprised by the dimension, I think, that it would meet with controversy and that it would be attacked, that it would have been extremely naive and kind of stupid for us to think that it would just go like that. Of course. But that it would create such a scandal. I didn't expect that. That television would, which is really what also made for the size of the scandal, is the refusal of that French television to buy it and to show it. That we should have thought at the beginning, perhaps, but then again, in the course of making it and putting it together, it would have been very naive of us, and I guess to some extent it was naive of us to think that French television would buy it. It became more and more obvious the reasons that it wouldn't. And there is an anecdote in connection with that, which I like to tell, because I like to give my opponents their due. When the then Director General of French television was in '69, and the General was no longer in power. He was incorporated into Les Églises. And when the Director General of French television at the time, which was still a monopoly and an authoritarian monopoly, and the censor was faced with this issue. He went out to see the General. There were witnesses to this. I was there, of course. And they went out to Colombo. He went to a man called de Bresson. He went out to see the General and told him about this this thing that, and the general asked him in a very brusque way, well, what's in it? And the Maison said, disagreeable truths. And they call from Barbie. Said, but France doesn't need disagreeable truths. France needs hope. I think that's a magnificent answer. But what are we to conclude from it? The general and I didn't have the same job.
I wanted to go back to something in Hotel Terminus because in the film, Claude Lanzmann appears as a witness and as a cinematic accomplice, I would say. And you once said that Shoah, his documentary of 1985, encouraged you to go in the direction of black humor.
Of what?
Black humor. You said that at the time of Hotel Terminus. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this relationship that you have to another major French filmmaker who indeed has made the non-fiction format his primary tool to make a portrait of a time and place.
Well, I don't remember this business about having said that I couldn't be encouraged to use black humor. I say so many things, and like other filmmakers, quite often according to circumstance and what may at the time seem to be in my best interest. I think Shoah is a masterpiece. I think in many ways it is the definitive masterpiece of the century. And after Shoah, there may not be any urgent need to make more and more of the same thing because it's done. Frankly. However, and there is a big yes, at the time when he appears in Hotel Terminus, it was like most of the interviews I make, it must have been lasted for about 2 hours or something. And finally, all I retain in the film is his inability to conceive that a lawyer who has defended the Algerian cause could then proceed to and he says something like, I guess I don't understand lawyers. And with that I agree. I think he doesn't understand lawyers. Because that's what the law profession is and should be about. Defending people, whatever the point of view, against society. Okay, so that was what was retained. So at the time it was very generous of him to have come and do this with me for me because of the love of his life. Was in the hospital and dying at the time. I'm referring, of course, to Simone de Beauvoir. His memoirs, I think, are extremely well written. And I'm just trying to give you to our relationship, which is no longer a good one. And that's an understatement. In his memoirs, he comes as far as to say that Clermont-Ferrand, which is the town in the south of Italy, which was selected for various reasons, that the song "The Medieval makes it look like a collaboration is done. That seems to me very unfair and extremely inaccurate and rather mean-spirited. So that's one element of falling out of each other. There are other things. It took an awful long time acknowledging that the song of pity had an influence on his way of making films. He could have taken a shorter time. Yes. However, and here comes up the issue again of documentaries should be, perhaps, should avoid his conception of documentary and the mise en scène is rather far removed from my own, because my feeling is that if you cannot generate spontaneity, in documentaries, you close windows instead of opening. This doesn't necessarily hold true because Shaw is a masterpiece. But I cannot conceive of myself, if I may just choose one example, there are some very spontaneous things also. And to me that is a great part of Shaw, when, for instance, it slowly becomes, becomes apparent that the Polish man who warned the Allies about the conditions in the ghetto and talks about them is himself basically very anti-Semitic.
Are you talking about Jan Karski? No.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Karski.
Yeah.
Karski.
Or when that woman says in Lodge, I think it is, that German woman says she doesn't remember, was it 4,000, was it 40,000?
Oh, yeah.
That those are extraordinary moments, which are based on spontaneity. But the idea of having the barber give his testimony while cutting hair has to mean that there is a contact established beforehand between the person in front of the camera and the person behind the camera. And it's not my conception of how I would wish to make documentaries. There's a basic difference there.
Marcel, I wanted to ask you a question about the Holocaust and the changing attitudes towards the Holocaust from the time Hotel Terminus was made until today. What do you
I
see
haven't
as...
seen any. No, really. I don't think I've seen any more. I think I've had quite enough of that subject as far as I know.
You have said that you've noticed a tendency in our society for people to be bored with the Holocaust. And I'd like you to elaborate on that, please.
That I find it understandable that as go from one generation to another and the events of the Second World War become more remote and more abstract, that younger people should feel impatient. I find that understanding. Should they be, should they not be, the moral issues involved? Again, I'm not a judge. I don't want to be a prosecutor. Let me just say, bored or impatient. I can understand some of these feelings. On the other hand, of course, it should remain the basic issue, an issue, the basic issue of the horrible past century. And it should not come out of the collective knowledge of people through things like boredom, indifference, or just lack of knowledge. On the other hand, yes, I don't think there is much to be gained by those immediately concerned, with families immediately concerned, wanting all the time to bring this to other people's attention. There is a point where that type of activity becomes obsessive and does not bring about the results that these people may feel they should achieve.
But I think, I mean, it's kind of misleading to just say the Holocaust and, you know, we seem to all know what that means. That's really not true. You actually once said that you believe you never made a film about the Holocaust, per se. And that may be, in fact, why the films are so resonant, because they're about, I mean, it's Klaus Barbie, his life and times. And one would say that, for example, your film, Hotel Terminus, gave rise to two formidable documentaries that were made about 8 years ago. One was Barbie Schroeder's film, Terror's Advocate, which is a portrait of Jacques Vergès, the very man who was defending Klaus Barbie, and as some of you know, has also in his roster of who he has represented dictators including Pol Pot and Milosevic and Holocaust revisionists and Carlos the Jackal, among other terrorists. So
one thing that lawyers, and he was a very good lawyer, great lawyer, one thing that I think that lawyers have in common, perhaps some other things too, with show business people, is that they very often are hands. And Jacques Vergès was a great hand. Yeah.
If you get the chance to see this, he comes across as this smug, self-satisfied, cigar-smoking guy. You know, you just kind of, around the same time, Kevin MacDonald, who's better known for fiction films like The Last King of Scotland, directed My Enemy's Enemy, also about Barbie, Vergès, etc. And in fact, in that one, you know, he tells us what happened afterwards, after Hotel Terminus, how Barbie got the life sentence, died in prison of cancer in 1991. But he also apparently, Barbie, claimed credit for killing Jean Moulin, the great, you know, the resistance hero. And, no, he claimed, I'm sorry, excuse me. An eyewitness affirms that Klaus Barbie killed Jean Moulin. The one that Barbie takes credit for killing is Che Guevara, who was in Bolivia at the same time in disguise. I mean, this is a fascinating documentary that's a kind of footnote to Hotel Terminus, and he offers the amazing detail that Barbie came to Paris and placed flowers on Jean Moulin's tomb in the Pantheon, and it was a photo of that that led to his being identified by Serge Klarsfeld, which did lead to him. I mean, this is amazing stuff. I can't verify it, but it's in this documentary.
This whole, because there's so many witnesses and people in front of the camera in Hotel Terminus. One thing that probably doesn't particularly impress people, there is Jean Moulin's private secretary, who's still alive incidentally, Daniel Cordier, does point out at one point that if it hadn't been for Jean Moulin, Barbie would have been like 1,000 others of his kind and not gone down in history as a particularly remarkable character. It is the torture of Jean Moulin. But again, there we get into very foggy areas. There is testimony, of course, that he tortured him for days. But it is not at all established that it was really Barbie who killed him. Because what happened to him when he sent him to Paris, he kept on being tortured in Paris. And he actually died in a railroad station in Chalon-sur-Marne on his way to Berlin. So even that is murky and often unreliable. So yes, I think that the moment when Cordier says that is a rather important moment which we lose sight of. There were so many torturers in the Nazi regime. The whole Nazi regime was based on some form of torture.
I want to add that besides the life and times of Barbie, Marcel, you said that the film is really about cynicism. Would you comment on that, please?
Again, I don't remember when I said that in what context, but yes, I think that is true. The relationship of, again, not the victims who had this need to testify what had happened to them. The whole society and the world around them, the way, the rat line itself, the CIC, the way Americans dealt with the problem of Nazis once the Cold War started, and they were afraid that perhaps some of these people might run over to the other side and provide them with information. All of this, of course, all these motivations are based on cynicism, and it's a form of cynicism. Yes, I do think it's a form of cynicism that I think came out of the ruins of the Civil Wars. And if there is one fiction film that I relate to in that particular context, it's The Third Man. which is indeed, which makes how clear the whole, that Harry Lime, the cynicism of Harry Lime is a perfect illustration of cynicism coming out of the smoking ruins of the worst totalitarian state that ever existed. Yeah.
I realize that we're almost at the end of time. I just want to say that, first of all, John Friedman, thank you for joining us. And second of all, listening to Marcel Ophuls is for me not unlike watching his movies, because there is something contrapuntal, there is something that is bracing and provocative, and there is something that is uniquely personal about your way of presenting, whether it's words or the form, almost musical form of your films. It's totally different, by the way, from Shoah, because I think it was Simone de Beauvoir who actually used the term musical in describing the way that Shoah works. In your case, I do use contrapuntal advisedly because I love the way that you give us contrasts, the way that you make us rethink what we just saw in terms of something that you add, whether it's Fred Astaire singing while we see the Bitburg Cemetery, or many other examples that could be called almost cruel in their wit, but that make us rethink our own human position. I just want to tell you how grateful we are on behalf of the Maison Francaise and the School of the Arts that you've come to speak with us tonight. Thank you.